Good afternoon, everybody, and good morning to those that are in WA. I'd like to welcome you to this BDOR event that Butterfly is hosting. I would like to start the session today by acknowledging country. I'm fortunate enough to be joining from the lands of the Ngunnawal people, and I'd like to pay my deepest respects to their elders past and present, and note that these lands were never ceded and always have been and always will be Aboriginal lands. I was reflecting with the panel just before we started. I was fortunate to fly up to Ngunnawal lands this morning, and it was just such a beautiful landscape coming up from lands of Wurundjeri in the city and around the river up to over through the mountains. And I just really encourage you all to take a moment to acknowledge the countries that you're joining from, and if you can connect to country and ground today, how that can really be felt in our bodies. I'd also like to acknowledge the contribution of those with lived and living experience to the work that we do. For Butterfly and for my organisation, the National Eating Disorders Collaboration, our work is absolutely underpinned by the stories and the advice and the advocacy from those with a lived experience and those that have supported them through their journey. I want to thank you for your contribution to our work, and thank you for the dedication to improving our system of care, and of course to Skye, Nicole and Tim for being part of this panel today. I'd just like to acknowledge that today we are talking about risk factors and contributing factors that have led to Nicole and Skye and Tim to experiencing an eating disorder in their life. So there may be topics that are triggering for you, and noting that sometimes we don't know what might trigger strong emotions in ourselves. So just like to preface that, and I just encourage you all to take good care of yourselves. If there is something that we talk about that is hard, I encourage you to contact the Butterfly helpline at any time during the session or after the session. We do get to have a brief Q&A at the end, so please submit your questions through the Q&A. And again, if there's questions that we don't quite get to, please contact the helpline and you'll be able to contact one of the counsellors there. So let's get on to the topic. So this year, the topic for BDOR, so Body Image and Eating Disorders Awareness Week, is unpacking the why. We often hear different stories happening in the media, in our communities, about what might cause eating disorders. And it's really important for us as leaders in the field, as people with lived experience, services, clinicians, to really use this as an opportunity to break down the stigma around what might cause an eating disorder. What we do know is that eating disorders are caused by a really complex interaction of different factors, from biology, psychology, behaviour, sociocultural factors and systemic factors. So it's not one factor that might lead to someone experiencing an eating disorder, but layers of those things and how they interact for that individual person. So we're looking at a number of things that are intersecting, and we think about the whole person and their whole experience rather than only focusing on one particular risk factor. So I've already mentioned about some of the reasons about why we would be talking about the why. Importantly, it helps us to be able to prevent eating disorders. If we know what causes something, we can really start to focus on how do we prevent those factors from happening in the first instance. It also helps us to understand who might be at higher risk of developing an eating disorder, so we can intervene early so that they might not experience an eating disorder, or at least reduce the severity of that eating disorder for the person. And equally, it helps us to establish or develop more effective treatments so that we can actually support a person with around those factors that might be perpetuating or keeping that eating disorder going. So whilst we are talking about those factors that are going to contribute to someone getting an eating disorder, it's equally as important for us to be talking about the protective factors. So the why not? What might help someone to recover from an eating disorder? What might prevent someone from developing an eating disorder at the same time? So it's really important for us to be balancing those two topics. And I'm really grateful for Nicole and Tim and Skye to be having a conversation with me today about all of those things that we've talked about. So I would like to just thank Tim and Nicole and Skye at this point for joining us today. It's a really powerful opportunity for you three to share your stories with us, and I just want to give you a heartfelt thank you for being here today. It really helps to build awareness in our community about eating disorders and how they might play out in different people's lives, and really help us to break down stigma. So thank you. I know it's a big thing to do something like this, and so I feel really privileged to feel like I'm kind of just in a bit of a room with you three today to have a bit of a chat. So for those online, the stories that Skye, Nicole, and Tim talk through today, some of their experiences might resonate with you, others might not. But I just really encourage you to approach this conversation just with an openness and curiosity, and reflection about what this information means to you, whether it be to your own experience, someone that you're caring for, or you might be in a clinical role. So how that might actually help you to provide care for other people. I'm going to throw to each of the panel members to introduce themselves before we dive into the conversation. So is it okay, Skye, if you could introduce yourself to the group today?
Yeah, that's totally fine. So hi, my name's Skye. I'm a Dugabara Yidinji and Indonesian, genderqueer person. My pronouns are she, they. I don't know, I somehow became a writer. I didn't really mean to, but I just kind of accidentally have become a writer. And I've chosen to write a lot about my experiences with kind of fat phobia and patient advocacy, kind of in those spaces based on my lived experience of someone in a larger body. I'm developing a book actually based on my experiences with the publisher Mugabala Book, which is actually where I am in the office today. And so, yeah, I'm just really excited to be here because I think that words are probably the thing that got me through it. And so I'm excited to kind of continue to use those words now that I am through it to kind of hopefully benefit others as well.
Oh, thanks, Skye. And it absolutely is. And reading blogs and stories and listening to you today, it absolutely is having an impact. Thank you. Tim.
G'day, my name's Tim. I guess I'm really, really excited and honoured to be here to sort of spread awareness around eating disorders, especially in men, and people with OCD. Yeah, it's been a different journey, but I'm glad to be here, and hopefully I can provide some insights, as it is as a male. So yeah.
Yeah, beautiful. Really important perspective. Thanks, Tim. And Nicole.
Yeah, please excuse the fact that I have a dog barking in the background. He has
We
his
can't even
out
hear
there.
it. We can't hear it as long as it's not distracting you, Nicole.
Oh, no,
and if
it's
you
all
need
good.
to do anything.
Yeah, so I'm Nicole Lee. I'm a woman with disability and lived experience of eating disorders and family and domestic violence. And I've done a lot of advocacy work in the women's sector and the disability space, but not spoken so much really all that publicly about my experience with having an eating disorder. So as someone with physical disability, psychosocial, and neurodiversity, yeah, sort of how all of that kind of comes in. So yeah, I wanted to bring that today. Thanks.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And you've all spoken already about those different layers, of factors that might have contributed to your experience of an eating disorder. We've spent a little bit of time together before today's session, but not a lot of time. And I just really want to reiterate that today is about telling your story that is safe to tell. You know, whatever you feel comfortable to tell the audience today, that I'll be asking some questions that you're all familiar with, and it's completely up to you that what feels okay today. So around the eating disorder or other experiences. So yeah, you're more than welcome to say, yeah, I might pass on that one if that's what feels okay for you today. No worries. All right, well, let's dive into some of the questions. We're going to try and move around each of the panel members, but I will do a bit of synthesizing and interacting between each as well. Skye, if it's okay if I start with you, but can you tell me a little bit about some of the factors that you've identified that would have contributed to your experience of an eating disorder?
Yeah, of course. So I was thinking a lot about this, and I think for me, I can kind of summarize it as like one big factor that can then be broken up into sub factors. So I think looking back my entire life, I've always felt this almost like primal urge and desire to have control over my body. And so I don't think it's helpful to go into it too much, but as a child, I experienced a lot of violence, and that's like emotional, physical, sexual. And so I feel like I never actually developed that sense of bodily autonomy that maybe other kids got when they had different childhoods than mine. And so, yeah, I think I have never felt that connection to security or autonomy. And so I always was kind of desiring control. And like Tim, I also have OCD. And I also have had dissociative amnesia since I was a toddler. So both of those, OCD and amnesia, there's that desire for control and to be in my body and things like that. And so when I was 17, I was sorry, we're starting off with like a lot. I feel crazy that I went first, but I was sexually assaulted again when I was 17, and it brought up a lot of stuff from my childhood. And I wasn't necessarily thinking about my body as in body image. It was more like sensory. So I felt, I was thinking things like, I hate what my body has done and I hate what has been done to my body. And so I need to find a way to control the sensations that it has in the future. Like, I don't want to feel these things again. And for me, I think trauma and sexual abuse as a young person, like, it really perfectly primed me for developing bulimia, because in my body, it really does feel almost identical. It's kind of like the push and the pull of control, shame in association with my body, and just kind of like a general sense of disconnectedness and almost like self flagellation as an aftermath of trauma and like negative sensory experiences.
Thank you for sharing that, Skye. There is so much in there. And I was even thinking about, at a high level, we can think about some of those contributing factors around what causes a change in your relationship with your body, with food, with weight, with eating. And so what you've been able to unpack is that as a result of many experiences as a young child and then through adolescence, that changed your relationship with your body and how you want to treat your body or respond to some of those experiences.
Mm.
What helped you to get to an understanding of all of these things together?
A lot of therapy. So during this time, I was actually homeless. So sorry, it's not funny. It's just when I look back, I'm just like, how did I get through all of that? Like, it's a good question, because I'm like, so at the time I was homeless. So I didn't really have a lot of like family or friends or anything like that. But I think, luckily, like I said, I think the one thing I've always had is I'm quite good with words. And so I just, and I was also in Tasmania when this happened. And so I just kind of had to be quite staunch and just kind of try to find resources for myself. But honestly, when I think back to it, like, I don't really know. Like, I don't know. Like, it's especially because I have dissociative amnesia. A lot of those times in my life, I think if you asked me next week to recollect it, I'd have a completely different level of like recollection. But right now, I think I just was a hustler and I just tried to kind of access as much information as I could and as many services as I could. And I just tried to be a sponge and really, really open to kind of learning and holding myself accountable and kind of recognizing the connections. Yeah, I think it was quite humbling, and I've always kind of been open to being humble. And so I just that's kind of how I got through it.
Beautiful. Thanks, Skye. You can probably see me like busily. I'm going to run out of paper here as there's just so much like powerful information in what you're saying, Skye. Those words like sponge and hustler, saying that I'm going to find information about what's going on. I'm going to seek support. And you found an outlet. You found words and how you can actually then get your story out there, and then the impact that that's had on you, but also, a broad community. It's quite amazing. Thanks for sharing. Yeah.
Thanks.
Tim, if it's okay, I'll pass to you next, but if you could tell me a little bit about your experience of an eating disorder and where that, where you've identified that it might have come from.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess being a male, I was completely oblivious, naive, ignorant, to eating disorders growing up. It was something I'd never thought about. And then to sort of have these feelings, urges, complete sort of even like a curiosity, I guess, of what was happening in my mind and my body. it was quite surreal, not having, I guess, the support network who had experienced caring for someone like this as well, was a little bit weird as it can be. So I think I kind of pinpointed it down to one or two things. So I had a diagnosis of OCD when I was about 10 years old. They'd sort of mixed between ADHD and OCD. The ADHD diagnosis ended up coming at 33. So it was a little bit different, but it was really, I think, around OCD and bullying. The OCD is something that I think mainly because I didn't have a lot of self-confidence, and I still don't. To be honest, it probably fed off that and the insecurity of wanting everyone to like me and sort of wanting romantic relationships and things like that. So that really, really cut into that. But then also the bullying aspect of it, that having some of my best friends, who are still my best friends, bullying me for my weight, for how I looked. And I think that just became tangled and intertwined with each other. And from there, it was just sort of a little bit of a massive spiral. And then where we are today of sort of fighting back and sort of learning to love myself is the main thing. I still have moments where I don't love myself as much as I should, but it's part of the learning experience of going through this terrible experience.
Yeah. Thanks, Tim. I can see that when we think about, I'm going to keep coming back to that layers. That's kind of come organically from our conversation. But you're a young child experiencing obsessive compulsive disorder, undiagnosed ADHD. So there's all of these things happening in your body and the way you're processing information in the world and responding to stimuli in the world. Then we're adding layers of bullying, and what we know is that bullying can result in body dissatisfaction and obviously then onto an eating disorder, particularly when that is around appearance. People can get bullied for a number of different things, but when there's bullying around appearance, that can absolutely really trigger someone into saying, oh, well, I'm going to change my body.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something at the time that I guess I'd heard it for quite a number of years around just being bullied about different things, but then for it to latch onto something that I was already insecure about, it was like an atomic bomb, that nothing was going to stop, to be honest. And that's just where I became completely and solely obsessed with how I looked, how I felt inside. So yeah, it was a very confusing time, because obviously, as I said, not being around anyone with an eating disorder or knowing what to do, resources and things like that, it was kind of being on a desert island by yourself.
Yeah. And even we're getting there, Tim, around the recognition of eating disorders in males, but we're not there yet, right?
Yeah. Oh, 100%. I was actually having a conversation with my wife around this last night. And the thing is, we've got to 2025 and the conversation around mental health and anxiety and that. The conversation started, and that's brilliant. It's good stuff. And everyone can talk to psychologists now, but we're still so far back in being able to talk about eating disorders.
Yeah. Thank you for being here, Tim, because it's people like you that are raising awareness, and then people will say, oh, is that something that I have too? Because what we do hear from people is that if we know that in broad community we don't have great health literacy around eating disorders, what's an eating disorder, the different types of eating disorders, who experiences eating disorders. But when we have the opportunity for someone to hear your story and say, oh, that's a thing that I don't have to have. I don't have to struggle with that anymore. Yeah. Thanks, Tim. And Nicole, if I could pass over to you, if you wanted to tell me a little bit more about your experience.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's a lifelong sort of impact of cumulative trauma from a young child into my teen years, and then sort of really a lot as an adult as well, sort of after having my children and in a very, very violent relationship. And it was never a conscious thought. It was never a conscious decision to restrict. It wasn't something that actually I ever thought about or knew that I was even really doing. It just became an action that I used in which to cope with the the life that I was living in and the home that I was living in, and it became sort of a coping strategy. It was as if, trauma, and when you're living with violence and you're being subjected to, violent experiences, it was as if my mind can overcome whatever my body can't. My mind is stronger than what my body is, and I can push myself to these limits, and no matter what anybody else does to me, I was no longer attached to my body. So it was a way of dissociating, it was a way of detaching, and it was a way of sort of having that kind of, I can transcend what's going on and what is happening to me. And I didn't realize that that was an eating disorder, and until sort of it started to be pointed out, and sort of that, went into treatment and things as an adult, and felt really out of place as a woman in a wheelchair, with children, and I wasn't a teenager, didn't fit that sort of mold. And then I have a lot of that very black and white thinking with neurodiversity as well, that kind of shaped a lot of how I conceptualized what eating disorders were, and then what it actually was, and making my way sort of through that. So I think at the beginning I was very misguided in what I thought it was. And then there was a lot of external factors from other people around, body image, and not being happy with how you look, and not fitting to beauty standards. And you kind of take that stuff on board and go, yeah, that's what it is, because that's the easy answer than it is to actually, no, it's all this trauma. And I need to now actually process what I detached from, and I need to process what I was, overcoming, because I was in that point of, I can be stronger than what is happening to me in this sort of very detached, kind of removed position. So yeah, it's messy to say what is the actual trigger versus it's much more complicated and much more nuanced to make your way through it.
I think that statement right there is so powerful, Nicole. It just emphasizes the complexity of where eating disorders can come from. And what I was hearing in some ways, that the eating disorder, you said, is a way of coping, that it was nearly a protective thing for you to protect you from the trauma that you had experienced. And the eating disorder can be really sneaky, can't it? Like, it come in saying, I'm a good thing. And then there's the external. So when we think about the environmental factors, how they can come in and validate, I'm in this weight-centric world. This is a good thing.
Yeah, and I think it's too simplistic and dismissive to say that it's around beauty standards. It's, what we go through and what we put ourselves through is far more complicated than just being able to boil it down to wanting to meet a beauty standard. We're very complex people, and we have really at times really quite impactful experiences, and and it's humans, the way our brains adapt to the environment we're living in to cope is quite remarkable. And so I think, boiling it down to just purely a glossy magazine is just too simple as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when we, when I said at the start too, around that complex interaction, that everyone is bombarded with these messages. And we know that rates of eating disorders are going up, but it doesn't mean that everyone develops an eating disorder. And that's where you can see the interaction of, from your experiences, Nicole. And I want to come back to the neurodiversity as well, and just pull that out a little bit about what that means for you and the interaction with an eating disorder, or how that might perpetuate or keep the eating disorder going as well. But is it okay, Skye, if I just come back to you a little bit and just see if you had any reflections there around eating disorders as a way of coping?
Yeah, I mean, listening to both Tim and Nicole speak, I was just like, I don't even need to be here, because they're just so beautifully wording like things that I really resonate. I almost felt like I was just an attendee, and I was like, that was so interesting. I think, I don't know if people, I think OCD is a form of neurodiversity. I don't know if that's controversial. And that feeling of kind of, I don't know if this is necessarily what you meant, Nicole, but the way that I interpret it in relation to my own experiences is like, almost like if I do something to my body, and I'm the one that has that control, and I'm now the perpetrator towards myself, to the point that I can dissociate away out of my body, then I don't have to experience what other people are doing to me. And I think, in a way, it was my coping mechanism as well. And I always was kind of, not always, but especially near when I had the diagnosis, I became very aware, like, oh, this is actually not helping me, this is harming me. But still, for so long, it was a coping skill. Like, I didn't really care that it wasn't really helpful to me. And I think a lot of that ties into the OCD as well. Being obsessive and compulsive, like it's tricky. It's really tricky when you have a coping skill, even if you are learning that it's maybe not the best thing for you and for your body. Yeah, I don't know. I just really was resonating. I was just listening.
Yeah. So really, really beautiful reflections there. And Skye was saying, like, you got to a place of saying the eating disorder is harming me. It's not helping me. Even though the eating disorder is sneaking, saying, no, I'm the helpful thing. I'm good at being there. And then finding other ways that you can help, help your body and your mind to cope. Tim, I was wondering if you had any reflections there. Skye and Tim, you've both talked about obsessive compulsive disorder. But Tim, I don't know if you had any thoughts around what was the interaction of those two things like for you, an eating disorder and obsessive compulsive tendencies or behaviours?
Jesus, it was like it is. The thing is, like, there are some really, really terrible sort of diseases and experiences that people have. I feel like OCD and eating disorders are so intertwined and they feed off vulnerability and things like that. And they pick apart things you're most insecure about, the things you most care about. My OCD over the nearly 30 years I've had OCD has ranged from health, sexuality, food, my body, self-esteem. It can change at the blink of an eye. So that's just my experiences. And then for it to sort of be added on top of an eating disorder, it's something that's it's actually quite cruel. I just when I started experiencing the effects of anorexia, I was flying to Brisbane on a fortnightly basis to see a psychologist to do exposure therapy, which I believe is the gold standard of treating OCD. That was good in a way, but I think this is the problem with exposure therapy is you can it's best sitting with that uneasy feeling. So when you have someone that's so preoccupied around food and their main fear is food and they're trying to make the decision of whether to really stick it out or just go ahead and do the compulsion, that person who already has a starved brain and things like that, making that decision isn't that easy. And it is just fuel on the fire. And it's honestly debilitating. But it's not something that can't be beaten. And I want to stress that enough, that just because it's happening and things like that doesn't mean that's the end game, that you have to live with this. The main thing is challenging and exposing yourself and sitting with that discomfort. And that's something I had to do, and it's pretty much what I had to do to be able to sort of get on this journey and get over the bridge of the uneasiness. But yeah, it's awful. I'm not going to be here and sugarcoat that it was perfect and rainbows and things like that. It's pretty ordinary. But I'm sort of living and breathing to show that it can be done. That you can experience both and come out the other end. A little more loopy than usual, but yeah, I'm here. Having fun.
Yeah, and we're all like, look like that. I mean, we're all smiling. This is a really wonderful and very moving conversation. And of course, there are days that are harder than others, Tim. I wanted to pull something out around treatment. That you had to fly to access treatment. That's a really hard thing. How was treatment for the OCD and the eating disorder? Were they happening at the same time, or did one interact with the other, or did you do one before the other? What happened?
No, so like I've always been fortunate enough to be part of a family that had the financial means to be able to sort of get me the best treatment and things like that. My parents always put a significant sort of emphasis on health comes first. So I was very, very lucky enough to be able to go and find things that would help, and my parents would fund that. the OCD treatment and eating disorder treatment didn't overlap. I'd actually started experiencing the eating disorder effects, as I said, but then being very pig-headed male, I decided to fly off to England. Right or wrong, I was going to England to just do what I want. So it kind of cut off, and then obviously became extremely sick, had to fly home in a big emergency back to Newcastle. And from there, all my inpatient treatments and day program treatments and things, it was more focusing on the eating disorder, not really sort of dealing with the OCD as much. And look, I'm not a professional on this whatsoever, but it didn't hurt, to be honest. I think it was focusing on the eating disorder was the most important thing, because it was life or death. OCD, it could potentially wait with some medical interventions and stuff like that. So,
yeah, great. Thanks, Tim. Nicole, you've been nodding to a few things that Tim was saying. I'm not going to ask you a question. I just want to just see if there were particular things that you were like resonating with.
Yeah, just the combination between treatments colliding and not colliding, and those sorts of comments that he was sort of talking about there. And that we tend to just treat the eating disorder but not the underlying cause of it, and so we kind of go just down one route of treatment, and we're not actually looking at all of it holistically. That was really I think that resonates with everybody. Yeah. And I think what you asked me before, like around neurodiversity and stuff, is that really black and white thinking, very, very black and white thinking, and lots of rules that I didn't realize were rules because I didn't know that other people didn't have those rules, and had all that very black and white thinking. And because I wasn't a teenager, I didn't fit that the rules around what was somebody with an eating disorder and what was somebody with anorexia. And so neurodiversity kind of really plays a big part in a lot of things that I do. Nuance of language, what one thing means and what I think it means are two different things, and it takes somebody to point something out. But things like, if I had any calories for the day, I no longer had an eating disorder. So I went down a very dangerous, hard and fast path of just nothing, and then wondering why I got really, really unwell very, very quickly, because that's what my black and white thinking was saying. And the same with recovery as well. Within recovery and going through those pathways and things, is that that you're chasing this picture of recovery, which means you never have an eating disorder thought again. You never think badly about your body. You've got acceptance and all of that, and that having this picture of recovery, and then when it doesn't actually meet that, just thinking, well, I'm never going to recover. And having to reconceptualize what recovery meant, and what sort of that journey is, and brokering that deal between recovery, not recovery, having that kind of peace deal between the two was something that I had to mentally do. In that, there's going to be good days, there's going to be bad days, and that doesn't mean a full relapse, and that it doesn't need to be either or. It's not you're fully recovered or you're fully disordered. There's this place in between that you can be in, and some, and you go through periods of better and periods of, of worse, and that's all okay. That's all still part and parcel with recovery, kind of thing. And that recovery doesn't end, like for me at least, it doesn't sort of end. It's sort of like this ongoing journey, that there's never like, yep, I've got it clear, I've got the certificate, it's done, never going to have that problem again, kind of thing. So that's like the really black and white thinking that sort of really played a big part in feeling like I'd failed because I wasn't meeting this idea of what recovery is. And so having to really sort of pull that apart a fair bit.
That idea, like as you were talking about, like what is recovery, and we come back to everyone's experience of an eating disorder is different, and everyone's experience of recovery is different. And so what recovery looks like for each of you is going to be your own personal experience. And Nicole, you just said so many things in there about that really spoke to me around how you've identified all of these different factors, in understanding your neurodivergence and how that may be contributing to an eating disorder, but also just how you're perceiving the world and interacting with it.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, like when things like I didn't realize, like food, all that sort of stuff, all of those things, food textures, colors, order in which you eat things, and being told off for things in treatment and going, why, what's wrong with that? Since when is that a problem? I just those sorts of things, textures and all those things, and not understanding, just thinking, oh, I just need to get over it, and not understanding there's lots of different sensory overwhelm things as well, and working out what role they play. And are they actually a major problem and that's something that needs to be worked on, or are they something that can exist in the whole journey of recovery kind of thing? Yeah, and treatment doesn't take, well, back in the day when I was in there, it doesn't take a lot of that stuff into account, unfortunately. I really don't think we understand or include that enough in treatment. That sort of, that sensory neurodiversity side of things when it comes to textures and colours and foods and things.
Yeah. So how are services providing neuroaffirming care that take into account the whole person? And it's like teasing out what's the eating disorder saying, don't do this, versus actually, this is me. You know, this is the way I process information and my sensory experiences. So it comes back to, what does recovery look like for me? We had a conversation, I think it was on Tuesday night, we had a webinar, and we were talking about, like, not everyone has to eat broccoli. You know, none of us eat all the foods under the sun, but what does recovery look like for you so that your decisions around food aren't impacting on your day-to-day well-being and your physical health? Yeah, beautiful. Skye, you were also nodding. Like this, I just feel like I don't really need to just keep asking pointed questions, but some of those things that Nicole was talking around recovery, if you had any reflections there.
Yeah, I had to completely change the way that I saw recovery. I didn't understand what it was. Like, I'm going to be so serious. Like, when I started treatment, I was I think I developed bulimia when I was 17, but I don't think I even started treatment until maybe, and it was, a lot of that was because of there was a lot of fat phobia, and there was a lot of like, no, you don't have an eating disorder, you just eat a lot. And then there was a lot of like, I went down a insane road where I was prescribed a lot of things that I think someone who didn't look like me wouldn't have been prescribed. So I didn't actually start treatment until I was probably like 21 or 22. And by then I think I was just like, so I didn't really know what recovery was, and recovery was this word that had been dangled in front of my face like for years, but I never knew what it was. And I kind of thought recovery was like, okay, one day you never think about it again. But again, I have OCD, and so I think the sense that I've come to with recovery is like, I don't do the behaviors anymore, but I don't think the obsessive and compulsive thoughts about food and the food noise for me personally will ever go away. And I was thinking about, so I'm in Rubibi, which is Broome. I'm in Western Australia on Yarra country. And when I came here in February or March, there was a site, it was like literally the day after I got off the plane here. And there was like a cyclone on the coast. And so Broome's a very remote town. And so all of the roads shut, and there was no food in the town. Like, literally, like the McDonald's closed because they had no food in the town. And I was like so triggered in a way I hadn't been triggered, because like you can't just drive, like Broome is like Broome, and you can't just drive and kind of get more food in a nearby town. And there was like these, like there was literally like no food on the shelves. There was no McDonald's. There was nothing in the town. And like most people were like, oh, it's the wet season, you just stock up and you just have stuff in the freezer. And I was like, I moved here yesterday. Like, I don't have a freezer to stock food in. I'm sorry. And there were these thoughts coming to me that were like, you could just, because I think it took about a week or a week and a half for food to be able to come in again. And there was this thought in my mind that was repeatedly coming to me that was like, you could just like not eat anything for a week and a half and no one would really judge you. Like, there's no food in the town. No one would like think it was a relapse. They would just think it was like unfortunate. And I really had to fight that and be like, and I like, there was like 2-minute noodles and stuff on the shelf. So there was like food that just wasn't like nourishing, beautiful food. But I really had to fight that. And luckily, at that point, I mean, that was this year, so I have a lot of tools and kind of healthy, beneficial coping skills. But I think I thought I would never have to deal with things like that again. Like, I thought I would never have thoughts that were that strong again. And I think something that I don't know if I've seen talked about a lot is for me, having an eating disorder, it makes you really sneaky. And you find ways to be like, oh, well, technically I could do this and I could explain it as something else. And so no one would actually notice anything. And they would just think I was doing it because of this thing. And so I was quite alarmed I was like, I have been recovered for years. And so I was like, why is this happening? But yeah, I don't know. I guess that's what I was thinking about when I was listening to Nicole.
Yeah, thanks, Skye. And what you're saying too is we've talked about, what might cause an eating disorder, but it's also being that aware of the triggers that might trigger the eating disorder again. And it sounds like, we talk about like the eating disorder is sneaky. The eating disorder is going to try and maneuver back in, and you just identified another trigger that maybe you weren't aware of before, that, you didn't predict that there would be a cyclone in the town that you were moving to and there wouldn't be food. And so, but what you had was like, I always talk about like a toolbox. You're like, that's the eating disorder there. I've got my tools that I can just fight that off, and I don't need to respond to the eating disorder thoughts. Like the eating disorder sneaks back in, creeps into your life, and you can kind of block it out with the strategies and skills, whether that be an internal dialogue or different activities or behaviours that you can engage in to stop it. Yeah, thanks, Skye. We've got question and answers coming in. I'm actually going to interweave them into our conversation, if that's okay, because they are working in perfectly, rather than saying, right, we're going to do Q&A now. But Tim, if it's okay, I wanted to throw to you and just to dig a little bit deeper into your experience of bullying, if that's okay. We know that was one of the earlier experiences for you, and particularly when it was bullying or comments around your body. How did you deal with this at the time? We know that an eating disorder was sneaky and crept in, but how would you recommend other people approach that or deal with that sort of experience?
Well, I dealt with that extremely poorly. Yeah, probably, yeah, was one of the main catalysts. Look, I've always been pretty, like I've always joked around and stuff like that, and sort of always been the class clown. Always was the class clown at school because I wanted people to like me. I had that sense of I need people's sort of gratification of me and things like that. I guess as you get older, your friend group shrinks. You get older, everyone does different things. So I think I was terrified of that. So, but these are school friends. These are blokes I've known for now 30 years. It was hard, I guess, because it's people that you trust that sort of have your back and want the best for you and things. And I think in men, this could just be a generalized statement. But I think in men, there's this thing that we all have to take the mickey out of each other. We all have to find each other's insecurities and just press on it. And if nothing comes out, we press harder. We go harder, or three of us will press the spot that really hurts the most. So, look, it was hard. But in the end, I think they're better people for it in the end as well. Because I've had individual conversations with all those blokes. I've had them apologize while having tears falling down their faces while we're sitting outside of a pub in Berlin. Like, I think it actually affected them more than me saying that. I think them seeing what it did to me and sort of like what their words kind of sort of do and how it sort of affected my health. I think that did more than me ever having a conversation with them about it. Saying, hey, you guys were jerks. I don't hold any malice. I don't harbor any ill will to them. They're still some of my best mates in the world. And I can pick them up. I can pick up my phone and call them straight away. Do it right now. And they'll answer. And I would answer for them as well. So I think it's a learning experience. Like, you're 20, 21. They're all just silly in the end. What would I say to them now? I think knowing what I know now, resources, what eating disorders do to people, I think I would have that conversation and educate them, just like I would educate them on anything around sort of health or just public social norms.
Mm.
So
Mm.
long-winded answer, but that's what I would do.
No, it's good. Like it's so nice that you can, like, we can start to paint a picture though, Tim, and for young people to understand the impacts of that. When we can educate young people, so that's actually really harmful, and it can have a really significant impact. And wisdom comes with aging, right, Tim? Sometimes people fear age. I'm like, oh, it gets better because you just know more and you're more clear on who you are, and you know what your support network is, and where you feel safe. But the eating disorder at that time made you feel safe.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Wisdom's a lovely thing. My mum just keeps turning out to be right the older I get.
Yeah. Damn. Thanks, Tim. Nicole, if it's okay, I wanted to ask you a question that we had a bit of a chat about when we met before today's session, was thinking about the intersection of having an eating disorder and also a disability. And if you had any words of advice for people in similar situations, but also their treating professionals on what they should be mindful of and how they can support people.
Yeah, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Treatment for people with a physical disability in a wheelchair. I'm also now tube fed. There's a lot of barriers to accessing treatment for somebody like myself. I've been not able to access public treatment facilities. I've been refused access and been held in medical wards instead of being able to access actual proper programs based on the fact that they don't want to take somebody in a wheelchair and they don't want to take somebody who's tube fed. That they see that as just too difficult. That's been a huge, huge barrier, and I'm not the only person that is encountering those barriers. So we need to be sort of looking at the community more broadly and how to actually make these places accessible for people, with physical disability in wheelchairs, who are tube fed, that are still experiencing an eating disorder and do not deserve to be locked in a medical ward with no therapy and force fed, under the guise of this is good for you, whilst causing more trauma. Unfortunately, that is what we encounter, and it does create more trauma, and it creates fear of engaging with the system. We don't want to go and ask for help because we know that's what we're going to get, and that's not help. So, for professionals, it's around creating safe spaces in which people know that they're going to be able to go in there, engage, be accepted, be included, that there's ways in which to work around to include us. There's ways in which to weigh us. There's ways in which to include us. We're not a danger. We're not difficult. Work with the person to accommodate what they need to be in that space, to engage with the program, and to not see it as a risk and to stop seeing it as a fear, but create that safe environment for people to go to. Otherwise, we do step away from the system. We don't reach out for help. We put ourselves in quite serious danger by not doing that. Our lives, literally at risk by avoiding engaging with the system because of all of those barriers and those things that we've encountered. And when it comes to sort of, health professionals, is sort of really being mindful around what some of the things you say for somebody in a wheelchair. I've had nurses, say to me, oh, I was so worried I had to give a thiamine injection to one of the eating disorder patients. And then I realized it was you. Because I've got quite muscular arms, even though I had, I had anorexia, but I had, some muscle left in my arms, and so and I'm really self-conscious of them because they are bigger than normal women's arms because they're quite muscular, and having the sort of really inappropriate things like that said, it's. And they're not even thinking, the times in the past when I have been able to get into eating disorder treatment facilities and then looking at me going, so are you going to be tempted to exercise in the room? And I'm looking and going, well, how do you think I'm actually going to do that? Please explain to me, because I'm sure my eating disorder would love to know how to exercise in this tiny little room in a wheelchair right now. But I'm telling you, stop and think about that one kind of thing. It's, so they have a very one size fits all approach, which leaves us out the door. And being mindful of working with people around what is a genuine fear, and what is a dislike, and what is a sensory thing, and and working with somebody to track and map that, identify it, label it, and then work your way through it. Because none of that is really done. Everything is just said, that's just an eating disorder thing and it'll go away. That's just your eating disorder talking, versus being able to identify, well, what is my eating disorder and what is a sensory thing, and not conflating the two.
Yeah. I often think too, we're working very hard. Like I lead the National Eating Disorders Collaboration, and our job is to try and build the system of care. And historically, eating disorders have been this siloed thing. So you have to go to an eating disorder specialist or specific service. What we're trying to say is no, people are seeing all parts of the health system and mental health system, but it doesn't mean you have to be a specialist to provide care to someone with an eating disorder. You don't have to be an expert in eating disorder, but actually leaning back on your basic principles of trauma-informed care and person-centered care, and thinking about like trauma-informed care, how we're creating safe spaces and asking people what feels okay for them. Like there are things that many practitioners learn about, and not just in the eating disorder context. We use that in all types of care. Yeah. Skye, it's a bit of a segue, but thinking about your experience of weight stigma, and how weight stigma is a huge barrier to people accessing care as well. I just wonder if you could talk to if weight stigma you found had an impact on you accessing care, your experience of an eating disorder.
Yeah, so I actually have a funny little story prepared. I have this in my back pocket, and I was like, will I get a chance to tell my funny little story?
Well, we didn't prepare this earlier, Skye, but go.
No, so I do have a funny story. So people are often surprised to hear. So I've been in a larger body my entire life. And a lot of people in my family have been in a larger body. And I did get quite bullied in school, but it was more like for being Aboriginal. And I never really, I don't know, like I never really thought about my body as a kid. And a lot of that is because I was very dissociated child, but also just like as a kid and literally until I was 17. Like when I looked at my body and the shape of my body and my features, I was like, I look like my mom and my dad, and I look like my cousins, and I love my family. And like, I'm just like such an amalgamation of all these people that I love. And so that's who I see. And I was focused on like my grades and like probably like boyfriends and girlfriend, I don't know, stupid things. And so I just never really thought about my body. And I remember when I was in grade 7, there was a girl in my class, and I don't know what she was going through. She was obviously having a rough time, and she lined up every single girl in the class and was like going down the line, like insulting them and saying her least favorite thing. And so she would be like, you're really stupid, and you're really desperate, and like you're really attention seeking, like all of these things. And I was like quite near the end of the line, and I was like, what horrible thing am I about to learn about myself that I've never noticed? Like, what's this horrible personality trait that I have? I was really scared. And she gets to me, and she's like, and Skye, you're fat. And I remember being like, yes. I was like, you've got nothing on my personality. I am a flawless human being. Like, that's all you can say. I remember literally going home to my mom and being like, I'm amazing. Like, I have no personality flaws. She just said and I remember, like, it's just so funny thinking back to when I was 12 years old and being called fat. And that was literally like the best, kindest thing she could have said to me in that situation. Now, I don't know, like, once the eating disorder had kind of unfortunately become a big part of my life, getting treatment, it really was quite harmful. I don't know, it's just interesting. Like when I tell that story, I don't even feel like I'm telling a story about me, because that's so different to people I see now. And I was misdiagnosed for a long time with binge eating disorder, and I think that's something that's really common because I had bulimia, and I think it was really hard I also should say that because I was like homeless and Indigenous and things, I was using a lot of like free services. So I don't want to, sometimes I generalize and I'm like, Tasmanian medical services suck, and that's not true. But I think the ones that I was accessing, everyone's probably working like 20 hours overtime a week, and they don't really know, like I try to be empathetic when I look back at some of the practitioners, but for a long time, it was really hard to try to add, especially because I'm so dissociated. Like it was so hard. Like often, and they're hard conversations to have. And when you have a dissociative disorder and you're having a hard conversation, your mind flies out of the room. And so, for a long time, I was like, hey, so I actually think that I'm doing this behavior and this behavior. So I don't think that I have the right diagnosis. And they were like, no, look at your body. Like you have this diagnosis. And so I went like I was in treatment for many years, but I was only in like effective treatment for probably like 2 or 3 years. And so it really truly, like, I think in many ways, like I think it like nearly killed me. Because yeah, like you're just so exhausted. Like, I wasn't getting the nutrients that my body needed and like energy. And so you're just exhausted. And so you're like, hey, this thing you diagnosed me with, this treatment you've given me, it's not effective. In a lot of ways, a lot of my treatment, the things I was prescribed were diets that restricted entire food groups, which was the opposite of, I think, what I needed at the time. And you just get to a point where you're like, I'm tired, like I don't want to argue with you anymore. And I remember, I'm kind of like Nicole was saying, I remember because my mom is a beautiful, gorgeous woman in a plus size body. She's stunning. And we had the same doctor. It was like a family doctor. And I remember her saying to me, like, oh, I'm not surprised that you don't know how to feed yourself, because clearly your mom doesn't know how to feed herself either. And like horrible things that they, like these doctors were saying about me and my mom. And weirdly, I think it was a doctor saying something about my mom that made me snap out of it and be like, actually, no. Like, I don't know. Like, it's so funny. I would take it for myself, but I was like, no, you
Not to your
cannot
mum.
speak about my mother that way. And so that's when, luckily, by that time, I had kind of semi-decent income. And so I was like, I'm actually going to try and invest them. I was lucky to be in a place where I had that privilege then, that I could be like, actually, I'm going to step away and try to find someone who does understand. And then once I got the correct diagnosis, things went, comparatively, they were so smooth. Like, of course they weren't smooth. Like recovery,
Recovery's hard.
I don't want to give, but comparatively, like having the correct diagnosis that actually matched my presentations, and then having a treatment plan that actually was appropriate for my experiences, comparatively, I was like, I wish I'd been here like 4 years ago.
Totally. I wish we didn't even have to have this conversation, Skye, to say that don't just ignore weight. Like weight isn't a factor in it. Actually have the conversation with someone, understand their whole experience, and understand what's the eating disorder, where's it come from, and how can I help you? And it's got nothing to do with your weight.
Like it really was not a factor for me at all. Like I was not thinking about, and I'd really never felt bad about my body my whole life. So it was interesting that was always the assumption, that that's what it had come from, and that's why I was doing these things, and it wasn't true.
Yeah, thanks, Skye. We are moving close to the end of the webinar, and I always do this and then I get in trouble for running a bit late, but I just want to throw to Tim and Nicole one more time, if that's okay, and just ask you a question around, if there was one thing that you could name, that's a really hard question actually, that helped you towards recovery. What is it that someone in your life, whether that be a treating professional or a carer, family member, that helped you towards recovery? Who wants to start? Nicole, you've got your mic off. Is it okay if I start with you?
I guess for me was having professionals that were able to point things out for me and help me intellectualize things in the way that I need to understand things and pull them apart and know things on a sort of very complex sort of level to understand the moving parts to it. But having people actually just pointing things out, somebody pointing out that at different points in time, I would have liked it to have happened sooner and probably more often, but it's being able to point out and say, what you're living with is violence, and that is not okay. But nobody ever pointed that out. They saw it happening, and lots of treatment things, that they knew that was going on. But nobody actually pointed out the connection or helped me make the connection. That is violence that you're living with, and that a lot of that is could be driving your eating disorder, and actually helping me make those connections sooner. And then pointing out, having people actually just point out that, well, restricting is still anorexia. If you're having a low amount of calories versus nothing, that's still eating disordered. That's still, like having that stuff pointed out, I think would have been really helpful for me. And the best therapists I've had are the ones that are able to sit there and just explain what a really good dietitian that's able to explain all the ins and outs of metabolism and the bits and pieces, so that I could understand it, what's happening for my body and why, in a way that my brain was, able to conceptualize it. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thanks, Nicole. And finally to you, Tim, before I do a quick wrap up.
Yes, what I think it was, I kind of like, it was almost an ultimatum that came from my sister-in-law. Um, and it was sort of, we sat down as a family, and it was basically either you sort of start giving this a good go and a good crack at beating it, or like you're just going to be in and out of hospital and sort of treatments and things like that. Yeah, I think also like there was a mixture of the two, and I also seeing my friends grow up, get in relationships, like have children, and that's the things that I always wanted and dreamed about, to be a father and stuff like that. So I think it was sort of just like, all right, it's time I really, really
Done.
give recovery a good crack. So yeah, that was a lot of willpower, I think, for me.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Skye and Nicole and Tim, for joining me this afternoon. I think you all beautifully summarised that at the end around the layers, like having someone listen to your story and identify the layers and how all of those different things might have contributed to your experience, but how then you can kind of peel off those layers to help you towards recovery. So thank you to everyone for joining us for today's session. Really, really grateful and a wonderful panel. I feel really privileged to have been able to have this conversation. Just encourage you, if there's been anything we've talked about today that's been really hard or brought anything up for you, please contact the Butterfly National Helpline. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you soon.